Welcome to the Prosper series, where we share the stories of remarkable veterans and military families who have prospered in their life after service. I'm your host, Talissa Papamau. I'm a veteran myself, having served 7 years in the Australian Army. So I'm looking forward to having conversations with other veterans and learning about their stories. Our next guest is an Air Force veteran who, after transitioning from the Air Force, entered the arts industry and really immersed herself in the freedom and creativity of the civilian world. After completing her double degree in business and communications, she's done everything from clothing brands, modelling to copywriting and social media management, and has even competed in a bodybuilding competition. More recently, she has joined Mates for Mates, facilitating social connection activities for her veterans, and is now acting regional manager in North Queensland. This year, she is part of the Oasis Townsville as project manager for Operation Navigator. Colleen Maclean, welcome to Prosper. It's great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, what I really love about your story is I think you really took the opportunity in transition to rediscover and redefine yourself. I think for veterans, we can really get ourselves stuck in a lane of we're always going to be a veteran and that's all we can be. So I'm really keen to unpack your story and hear more about your involvement in the arts, your creativity, and then even right down to what you're doing more recently. But what we're going to do, we'll go back and we'll go back to a little bit more of when you joined the ADF and some key highlights of your career.
Sure. So I joined when I was 17 in 2009. Straight out of high school, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. I originally wanted to join as a medic or a nurso, but didn't have the prerequisites to actually join as either of those things. So I joined as part of the ADF Gap Year program with the Air Force. And it was through that 12 months after going through 1 RTU and officer training that I decided that I wanted to stay within the Air Force, but I wanted to take an enlisted role. And I re-mustered to Aeronautical Life support fitter.
That's fantastic. 17, I mean, what was it that what made you decide at such a young age that you thought that military might be for you? Were you after the challenge? What was it that drew you to it?
I'd always been fascinated by aviation and aircraft. I also had family ties to the Air Force by my great aunt, who was part of the Women's Auxiliary Air Force back in the Second World War. And, you know, growing up, amazing. I watched her march in every single Anzac Day, and she was heavily involved with the RSL in our hometown. So I always just kind of found it fascinating, was kind of drawn to that life of the uniform and the service. So, yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. And your aunt sounds like she was quite an inspirational lady. When it comes to your ADF career, was there a defining moment that changed your life?
I think there was many moments throughout my entire career. So I ended up serving 10 years that really shaped who I became. But I think what changed my entire life and my perspective was the point at which I was told I'd be medically discharging. I had grown up within defence. It was, you know, a huge part of my life. I was only 27 at the time, and had 8 surgeries over the course of about 3 or 4 years, and had to completely rediscover what it was that I wanted to do with my life, where I was going to be headed. So I think that was the moment that really it more redefined who I was, because I really had to start asking myself all those hard questions of who was I without the uniform on? What did I truly enjoy? What was a civilian job that I could do with the injuries that I had, but also what were civilian jobs in general, because what I did within defence didn't really translate to the civilian world.
It's fantastic, and I think you're quite right. When you join at 17, you really do grow up in the military, and I think one of the most daunting aspects of transition, now whether that be, unfortunately, a medical separation that I don't think any of us plan for, is that, well, my life experiences don't translate to so many other of the civilian counterparts, whether that just be from skills, but also just our lifestyles and the experiences that we've had. So I can see that you've sort of needed to redefine and rediscover who you were outside of the uniform. What were some ways that you did that?
I reached heavily into my civilian network and connections. So throughout the entirety of my ADF career, I always found a gym in my local area that was a civilian gym that had no connection whatsoever to ADF, to really keep some connection to the civilian world in a way. So through that, I was actually able to meet a very diverse range of people with a lot of diverse backgrounds and professions. And I lent very heavily into that, asking them questions about what they did. I read every uni guide that I could get my hands on, and looked at what are the things of my personality that lean towards certain professions, and what was it in my current role as a life support fitter that I really enjoyed. And a lot of that was talking to people, building relationships with other defence members and other sections, and really building those connections and relationships in order to have logistics flow better and service flow better. So yeah, I really did dive into the contingency planning and the research side of things, into what I was going to do and what I liked doing and what I was good at.
I think it's great that you sort of took the key parts of the military that you enjoyed and that formed important parts of your identity, but also that you're clearly naturally good at and passionate about, and then attempted to find civilian equivalents. And of course it will be different, but I do feel that more of our experiences in the military are translatable to the civilian environment than I think we give ourselves credit for.
I definitely agree.
I want to talk a little bit more about your ADF transition and what led to that.
So I had been struggling with pain through my knees for a little while, and I'd already had 2 shoulder surgeries at that point in 2016, and went to the doctor and kind of got all the tests and everything done, and went through, I think it ended up being 5 surgeon's appointments, specialist appointments, to work out A, what was going on, and B, what was the best course of action. So I had to have a series of surgeries, which are called tibial tubercle osteotomies, and they basically realign your patella, because I'd worn away all the cartilage within my knees, and that was 4 surgeries every 6 months for around about 2 years. So that kind of long recovery process, after all of that, being downgraded for such a long period of time, it was really hard to actually recover and rehab those surgeries to be able to be back up at a fitness level to be able to be IR compliant, and do my job. And at the end of the day, one of the surgeries just didn't work as well as it should have, and it left me not being able to climb in the back of an aircraft without feeling pain, and go up ladders and lift heavy things, to be able to fit to the aircraft and things like that. So I basically became desk bound, and I was just not able to do my job in the military anymore. So we went through the process after going to Central Medical Review, and I was recommended for medical discharge. So we moved in that direction.
Sure. No, that's understandable. 8 surgeries. You've touched on the pain management aspect of that. And I think when it comes to injuries and repeated injuries, that point you touched on where not being able to do the things that you used to do has such a psychological element to it. You're quite young and you're fit and you're used to being capable, and when all of a sudden your body's not doing the things that you used to frankly take for granted, there's a real psychological element to that I empathise with greatly. So what was that like for you?
It was tough. It was really tough. We do take for granted our youth, and when you're in the military and in the uniform, you feel like you're 6 foot tall and bulletproof, and it's not until you sustain an injury or you ignore the little niggles, and those niggles turn into injuries, and it is tough because you feel like you're letting the team down if you can't do your job properly, right? Or if you can't keep up with the demand of what your job requires. So that psychological and emotional burden of managing pain and then also feeling like you're letting the team down does take its toll.
Yeah, absolutely. And so the decision was made to medically transition out. So when that happened, did you have a plan in mind of how you were going to manage that process?
To be honest, I had no solid plan. I really was just looking at my options. And when you look at the civilian world, the options are endless. You really can do anything within the civilian world. So I had no plan. I just knew that I had to get a jump start on my next career. And I knew that in order to get a job in the field that I was interested in, I had to go to uni and get a degree. So that's where I, jumped straight into my double degree in business and comms. And I took my long service leave for that 3 months leading up to my discharge date to start studying full time and immerse myself in student life and civilian life, really.
It's completely, I think, understandable that, you don't necessarily have a plan when you are a medical transition. And I think the more we can have a plan early, because medical transition, I guess, is always sort of an ever-present option, the better it will be for each and every veteran that it happens to. So, and you must get stuck in this mentality of rehab after rehab and surgery after surgery, and then all of a sudden they're like, "Yep, no, we need a plan for transition. What are you going to do?" And so such a jarring sort of change of focus in a way. But it's fantastic that you eventually decided to enter tertiary education. As part of your transition, what financial challenges were you faced with? Obviously, employability was a big aspect of why you went on for further education, but were there any other financial challenges that you faced?
I think the biggest shock to the system was the cost of living. For me, it was one day I had allowances like rental allowance and things like that, where my rent was approximately like $250 a week when you took into account the rental allowance. To the next day, losing all of those allowances and my rent going up to $360 a week. So on top of just your usual cost of living rises at that point in time, because, you know, that was 2019, your loss of that financial, I guess, life jacket that defence does actually give you in the form of allowances and things, it really does shock you into realising that, you know, probably weren't as well, you're not as well off as you think you are when you leave. I didn't really have an idea of finances. I had bought a house and renovated a house when I was 23. So, you know, I knew I had savings in the bank from the sale of that property. So I knew I had a little bit of time to find my feet. But I was no way prepared for what was to come, especially going into, you know, 2020, and then post 2020 with everything skyrocketing, interest rates and everything skyrocketing. And it really took me a little while to find my feet in that arena and really educate myself.
You're completely right. Like with the sort of the insular environment that is defence, because, you know, there are the pay and allowances. There's free medical, there's free dental. You know, even right down to the fact that, you know, we have our uniforms and things like that. So 5 out of 7 days we know what we're wearing. And if you're like me, I can really blow the budget when it comes to clothes shopping. But you're absolutely right. And, you know, I think as part of this discussion around the needing to plan early for your transition, there is that real financial literacy piece, because the pay and entitlements, I guess, around defence make it a really cost-effective way to live. So that's something, an area that I'm quite passionate about. And so, you know, I want to talk about any of the financial services that you've accessed along the way.
So as far as financial services go, you know, the first 45 weeks I had incapacity payments through DVA, which I also medically discharged on a Class A pension through ComSuper as well.
Right.
So that was a real saving grace. That allowed me to keep studying, and really all I had to do was pick up part-time work after that 45 weeks was over, to make up the difference in that salary that I was getting from defence. But having said that, you know, you still can't just solely rely on, you know, those things to keep you going. And I knew that I had to make a plan for my future to be able to be financially stable, and have the financial freedom to buy my next property, and invest, and, you know, do what I did and move to a completely different town. It was, I had those things in the background, but to be honest, it wasn't until I started working in the veteran space that I actually knew about all of the services and all of the organisations that are out, you know, educating veterans in financial literacy and helping with budgeting or financial advice, or even where to go to find a financial advisor.
I think there is a wealth of support services out there, and it is that piece of knowing where to go, and being able to access the information that's right for you at that time in life. Because the other thing I see happen is you could have a perfect transition in terms of, the process, but then, a couple of years later, the unthinkable happens. So and your life changes. So the information you need and the support that you need is therefore different to what it was a couple of years ago. And I think that's a challenge that, across the sector that we're all trying to grapple with. And equally, the invalidity pension for medical transitions really is a lifeline. And it's great to see that you've used that as sort of the foundation, but then gone on to rebuild your life. So I want to talk about the aspect of being up there in Townsville, and one of the things you're involved with is Operation Navigator, which sounds really exciting. And I believe that you were a key contributor to the design of this program. So please talk to us about what that's about.
Yeah, so Op Navigator was born from the findings from Operation Compass and the National Suicide Prevention Trial that happened. And it really has been shaped by the current Royal Commission in where we're headed with it. So what we want to do is start that transition piece as early in defence members' career as possible. So actually start them getting curious about what it is that they will need if the inevitable arises, because we know from the census data that the average service of ADF personnel is 7 to 10 years. A lot of people will join, and I was in this boat at 17. I thought I was going to be a lifer. I thought I was going to be in for the long haul, and this was my career, and I was going to have many jobs, but they were all in defence. You can't predict the future, but you can plan for the worst and prepare and give yourself a solid foundation to really step off into the civilian world. So Operation Navigator has been co-designed with current and ex-serving members of the Townsville community. We have designed a program that will be delivered to current serving ADF members in their first 12 months posting to Townsville after initial employment training. And it really is a full day of just learning where to go, where they can find the information at the point in time that they need it. Because as you said, the information that you're going to need now is going to be different in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time. You get bombarded with information from when you're in recruits, with the mandatory training and all of those kind of things, and you really don't take it in because at that point in your career you don't think you need it. But what we're trying to do with this program is talk to people about, having a plan, not just outside of defence, but for your entire ADF career. You can plan to have a long, fulfilling ADF career, and that's great, and put those factors, plans in place to be able to reach your goal of whatever it may be. But really, have something to fall back on if inevitably something happens and circumstances change and you may need to medically separate or admin separate that are outside of your control. Operation Navigator is starting next year. We are looking to launch the pilot just for the Townsville community. But we're hoping that it becomes a conversation that defence members all over Australia will be having in getting curious and planning from day one.
That sounds fantastic, and I'm sure we will definitely check in with you then once the pilot kicks off. and I wish it every success. It's certainly something that when you use your own lived experience, you bring such wealth of sort of forward facing of how can we move forward and improve a better system for everyone who leaves the military. There's fantastic work happening up there in Oasis in Townsville, and I'm excited to hear more about Op Navigator as it progresses. I'm aware that CSC often travel up there. We have our member educators and they always have a fantastic experience when they attend. So they will be there as well, and we're looking forward to working together again. Just in summary for us today, Colleen, what advice or tips do you have for ADF who are preparing to transition?
Number one, plan early.
Aside from engaging in the Op Navigator pilot next year, if you're based in Townsville,
definitely plan early. Keep yourself integrated within your civilian communities. Those civilian connections and touch points are so important when you leave. I know that my civilian network and community of creatives that I created when I left were quintessential in helping me adjust to being out of uniform, and really tapping into that creative side of things that I had not really seen myself as creative before. So, plan for the future, keep those civilian connections, and have interests outside of defence that aren't connected to defence. Keep some of those interests, hobbies, whatever they may be, going throughout your entire career, because they will make all the difference when you do transition inevitably back into the civilian world, whether that be in your 20s or 30s, or whether that be at retirement.
No, that's been fantastic. Thank you so much, Colleen. Thank you for sharing your story, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
We hope you got valuable insights from this discussion today. You can listen to more episodes and keep an eye out on our social media channels or visit our website for future updates.